In this video, we'll take a look at Link, which is our new MIDI remote script for the Novation Launch Control and Ableton Live 9. Installing Link is very straightforward. After purchasing, you'll be forwarded to a download page where you can download a zip file. Within that zip file, you'll find Windows and OS X installers. In this example, I'm going to show you the Windows installer, but the OS X installer is basically identical. The installer just requires you to accept a license agreement, and that's pretty much it. Everything else is automatic. After installing, you'll need to do some initial setup in Live. You'll do this all in Preferences on the MIDI Sync tab. You'll need to select Link as a control surface, with Launch Control as the input and output. You can optionally select a takeover mode. This will prevent jumps in value when switching between parameters that the knobs control. In addition to the typical user manual, a live lesson is also supplied, and this provides a graphical reference of all the functions available in the various Link modes. The status bar in Live displays a variety of information about Link, and this is very useful for keeping track of what you're currently controlling. You'll see examples of this throughout the rest of this video. Link includes a user preferences file, which allows you to change some of its settings. One of the most important of these is the master surface name. Link can function as a standalone control surface, or it can be linked to another control surface. When linked, the two control surfaces essentially become one powerful control surface for Live. The master surface name allows you to specify which control surface, if any, to link to. The functionality of Link is essentially the same regardless of whether or not it's linked to another control surface. Here's an example of using Link standalone. The left and right buttons select the tracks to control, and a grid selector is shown to display which tracks are being controlled. Link provides 8 modes, which you can select from the Mode Select page. You can access that page by pressing the User button. Here the pads are used to select modes. The Mode Select page also has a few other functions. It can toggle transport state, control session record, as well as undo and redo. Mix mode provides control over the mixer settings of the 8 tracks that are being controlled. By default, the knobs will control pan and volume. Pressing the down button quickly will cycle down to sends A and B. If more sends are available, pressing the down button again will cycle down to the next set of sends. The up button does the same process in reverse, so we'll cycle back to send A and B, and then cycle back to pan and volume. By default, the pads control track mute. Pressing a pad quickly will toggle the mute state of the track. Holding the pad down will offer momentary control. When the up button is pressed, the pads will be assigned to solo. And again, pressing a pad quickly will toggle the solo state of the track. Holding it down will offer momentary control. When the down button is pressed, the pads will be assigned to track select. So these will select tracks, and if a track is already selected, it'll arm the track. If the track is a group track, holding a pad down will expand or collapse the group. EQ mode provides control over EQ8 or EQ3 instances across the 8 tracks being controlled. By default, the knobs control the higher bands. Pressing the down button will assign the knobs to the lower bands. The pads control track select just like we saw in mix mode. Filter mode provides control over the filter section of auto filter or a variety of Live's instruments on the 8 tracks being controlled. The upper knobs control frequency and the lower knobs control resonance. The up and down buttons have no function in this mode, and the pads control track select just like we saw in mix mode. User device mode allows you to control user specified parameters of the user specified device across the 8 tracks being controlled. You can specify the device and parameters to control in your user preferences file. By default, this will control beat repeat parameters. If more than one set of parameters has been specified, the up and down buttons will switch between sets of parameters. The pads control track select just like in mix mode. In clip mode, the pads launch the clips on the selected scene. You can navigate between scenes with the up and down buttons. The knobs control pan and volume. Device mode provides control over the selected device. By default, the knobs control 2 banks of parameters at a time. This gives you control over 16 parameters at a time. If the device has more than 16 parameters, you can move between sets of 2 banks with the first 4 pads. The up and down buttons move left and right between devices. If the selected device is a rack, the knobs will be configured to match the layout of the rack's macros, so only the first 4 knobs on each row will be used. This pad will toggle device lock, and the last pad will control the device's on-off switch. If pressed quickly, this will toggle the on-off switch, and if held down, it offers momentary control. Chain mix mode provides control over the mixer section of an audio effect rack instrument rack, or drum rack is shown here. The knobs will control pan and volume, and the pads will control mute. If pressed quickly, these will toggle the mute state, and if held down, they offer momentary control. If more than 8 chains are available, you can move between these with the up and down buttons. Returns mode is basically identical to mix mode, so the knobs can control pan and volume as well as sends, and the pads can mute, solo, or select. You can also use the launch control for MIDI mapping while using Link. In order to set that up, you first need to turn on the remote switches for Link input and Link output. You can disable Link and switch to MIDI mapping capabilities by holding down the user button and pressing the last pad. This will move you to user template 1. From there, user templates 1 through 7 can be used for MIDI mapping, and when you want to switch back to Link, just press the factory button.